The vote board was already glowing red. No introductions, no ceremony. High Arbiter Sareth's voice echoed through the Grand Council chamber. The Kresh Empire has formally invoked Clause 17, War Authorization Pending Confirmation. A ripple tore through the floating observation pods. At the center platform stood Admiral Vorek, tall, still, armored in authority. Opposite him, Jason Klein was reading a newspaper, a physical one. The faint rustle of paper cut through the chamber's silence. Vorek's 3 horizontal amber eyes narrowed. "Envoy Klein," he said, voice controlled but lethal. "The Empire has declared war over the Helix Nebula mining violation. Withdraw within 10 solar cycles, or we proceed." The red vote lights intensified. Weapons authorization signals flickered across side displays. The chamber braced. Jason turned a page, didn't look up. A shockwave of whispers. Vorek stepped forward, armor humming softly. "Human, I am speaking to you." Jason raised one finger, still reading. "Half a cycle is enough." Silence. Vorek's bioluminescent flares brighter. "You negotiate the deadline." Jason finally looked up, calm, mildly curious. "No," he said, "I'm adjusting your expectations." He folded the newspaper with care and stood. "You just declared war," Jason continued evenly. "I'm informing you that your first fleet won't reach Helix." The chamber froze. Vorek's posture shifted, almost imperceptibly. "You threaten interception." Jason shrugged. "No, I'm stating a scheduling conflict." Above them, the central star map flickered. The Helix Nebula icon dimmed. Then it vanished. A collective intake of breath across 100 species. Vorek's lower pupils contracted sharply. "Explain." Jason tucked the newspaper under his arm. "We relocated our extraction infrastructure 12 minutes ago." The chamber erupted. Drek's drone optics flared. Volari Ambassador Ryzen's antennae stiffened. Thessian Representative Luma's internal glow pulsed rapidly. Vorek did not move. "Relocated? How?" Jason smiled faintly. "Modular gravitational lattice anchors. Independent jump capability. We don't build fixed colonies anymore." He tilted his head. "You declared war on an address that no longer exists." The red vote board flickered. Several war authorization lights dimmed. Jason met Vorek's gaze directly. "You can still proceed, Admiral." A beat. "But now it's not reclamation, it's pursuit. And pursuit is expensive." The chamber understood. The title had been delivered. War declared. Envoy shrugged. Empire destabilized. Jason stepped back towards his seat. "Your move." The chamber did not erupt. It fractured. Above the central disk, the Concordat trade lattice flared into motion. Blue transit lines recalculated in real time, rerouting around the now vacant Helix sector. Freight corridors bent sharply. 3 long-range shipping lanes collapsed into warning amber. Economic projections cascaded across side panels. Instability variance, 12%. Projected commodity spike, 31%. Outer rim insurance multipliers tripling by the second. Volari Ambassador Ryzan's upper arms lifted in alarm, antenna filaments trembling. "The Helix corridor stabilizes 4 agricultural routes," he said, voice tight. "Its displacement destabilizes traffic compression nodes. This affects more than Kresh claims." Across the chamber, Thessian Representative Luma shimmered, internal crystal channels pulsing sharp white. "Our refractive shipping arrays relied on Helix's gravitational constant. You have altered a fixed anchor in trade geometry." The Drex collective drone pivoted, optic arrays recalibrating. Strategic projection updated. Probability of sector fragmentation increased. Conflict risk 38% and rising. High Arbiter Sareth's pale form rose slowly from the judicial dais. "Envoy Klein." The throat membrane resonated, voice layered and ancient. Under Concordat law, relocation of sovereign infrastructure without procedural notice requires clarification. Jason did not return to the center. He remained beside his chair, newspaper folded under one arm. It was sovereign, and it was necessary. Nothing more. Across the chamber, Vorek's bioluminescent patterns steadied from flare to controlled amber. You destabilize commerce to avoid confrontation. You call this diplomacy? Jason's gaze didn't waver. I call it survival. A faint flicker crossed the Kresh tactical display. Their fleet remained in formation at Helix's former coordinates. Not advancing, not withdrawing, holding. On a side channel, muted but visible, Kresh subcommanders transmitted priority queries, awaiting Imperial directive, clarify rules of engagement, confirm pursuit authority, internal hesitation. The chamber felt it. Then, a new alert pulsed across the Concordat lattice. Unidentified fleet signature, approaching the outer trade corridor, vector unknown, and every rerouted shipping line bent directly.
The chamber lights shifted from economic amber to procedural white. High Arbiter Sereth rose fully from the judicial dais, four graceful arms extending outward in measured authority. Emergency Concordat review is hereby initiated. The throat membrane resonated. Clause 17, enforcement parameters under formal audit. The holographic lattice above compressed into a structured legal grid, lines of treaty language scrolled beside live tactical overlays. A new indicator appeared. Enforcement audit active. Subsections illuminated. Unauthorized escalation. Sector destabilization risk. Collective trade exposure. Sereth's violet eyes fixed on Admiral Vorek. Any forward military advancement into disputed or restructured zones during active audit will trigger automatic corridor suspension protocols. Around the chamber, transport lanes flickered with embargo simulations. Entire sectors dimmed under projected trade lockouts. Sanction probability, 22%, 31%, rising. Valari delegates huddled in rapid tonal exchange. Thessian crystal channels pulsed in cold calculation. The Drex drone transmitted silent alliance probability revisions. For the first time, a Mirathi coalition representative spoke openly. The Empire's timing appears strategically reckless. A murmur followed. Behind Vorek, one Kresh officer shifted weight. Subtle, but wrong. Another checked a wrist-mounted tactical feed longer than necessary. Fleet status still red, holding formation, no advance. Vorek stepped forward onto the speaking disc, bioluminescent patterns contained but tight. This is Terran provocation disguised as procedure, he said evenly. The Empire asserts sovereign reclamation rights. We will not be politically cornered for defending lawful territory. His lower pupils contracted, just slightly. Jason remained where he stood, hands behind his back, newspaper tucked beneath his arm. We prefer stable corridors. So does the Concordat. Nothing more. Sanction probability ticked higher, 38%. A new holographic element materialized above the chamber. Imperial compliance window. Countdown initiated. 7 standard hours. Failure to cooperate would auto-trigger corridor restrictions and trade review embargo. Sereth's voice carried across the sphere. A temporary Imperial operational restriction vote is now before the Council. Voting nodes illuminated across 100 species. The Empire was no longer threatening war. It was facing investigation, and the galaxy was watching towards it. A private channel opened behind Admiral Vorek's retinal overlay, encrypted. Imperial priority. 3 senior commanders appeared in segmented tactical projection. Commander Telvar spoke first. Helix relocation is deception. We pursue immediately. Demonstrate strength before sanction vote solidifies. Another voice cut in. Older, colder. Strategic Marshal Dareth.
Our forward fleet supply chain runs through Helix mineral compression nodes. Terran optimization algorithms remain integrated in secondary processing layers. Disrupting those channels without recalibration risks alloy yield instability. A flicker of hesitation. Telvar bristled. We are not dependent on Terran logistics. Dareth did not blink. We are partially synchronized. Silence inside the channel. Outside, the chamber's sanction probability climbed to 44%. Compliance countdown, 6 hours, 12 minutes. Vorek's posture remained rigid on the speaking disc, but his lower pupils contracted sharply. Pride demanded motion. Stability demanded patience. Another alert flared across his peripheral feed. Kesh Sub-Commander Rax initiated partial pursuit override. Fleet engines spiked. A faint acceleration vector appeared. Then, execution denied. Imperial escalation lock active. Override requires supreme authorization. A half-second delay, long enough for Concordat observers to notice the spike. Drek's drone optics intensified. Valari antennae lifted sharply. A visible fracture. Vorek's internal channel erupted in clipped exchanges. "Stand down," he transmitted privately. Rax resisted. "Admiral, hesitation invites weakness." Vorek's voice hardened. "Unauthorized pursuit invites containment." The engine stabilized. Fleet returned to holding pattern. In the chamber, High Arbiter Sereth's violet gaze lingered on Vorek longer than before. Voting nodes continued to illuminate. Behind Jason, the holographic sanction model fluctuated between 41 and 47%. Jason did not move, hands behind his back, newspaper tucked under his arm. He watched. Across the chamber's far observation tier, a tall obsidian-gray figure stood in shadow, 3 horizontal eyes reflecting crimson underglow. Krexar Commander Vakor observed silently, not speaking, not intervening, calculating. The Empire had not fractured, but it was no longer unified, and someone else had begun measuring its weakness.
The unidentified fleet signature multiplied. 1 contact became 3. 3 became 12. Then the iconography shifted from distortion artifact to confirmed mass displacement reading. Across the chamber ceiling, the outer trade corridor projection destabilized. Blue transit lines converged toward the anomaly like compressed arteries. Concordat monitoring station RX-19 transmitted live telemetry. Signal interference increasing. Gravitational shear variance at 4.2. Corridor integrity degrading. The projection warped. A faint lensing ripple spread across the sector map. Valari Ambassador Ryzen's antennae flared sharply. That convergence point carries 27 active trade vessels. Thessian Representative Luma pulsed in alarm, crystalline facets refracting erratic light. Our shipping refractors are locking onto distorted gravity wells. This is not natural fluctuation. Another alert. RX-21 reporting partial sensor blindness. Feed quality degrading. The unidentified vessels shifted formation. Not random, directed. Vorek's tactical display recalibrated instantly. His lower pupils narrowed. The Kresh fleet, still holding near Helix's former position, now sat exposed along a vulnerable vector between the anomaly and the converging corridor cluster. Political delay had fixed them in place. He understood it immediately. If the anomaly expanded, his fleet would be first contact. Sanction probability flickered down, then stalled. High Arbiter Sereth raised 2 arms. Vote countdown suspended. External vector introduces third-party destabilization. Containment now includes corridor-wide risk. Compliance timer paused. RX-19's voice returned, strained. Emergency assistance request. We are experiencing static. Transmission severed mid-sentence. Across the projection, a blackout ripple spread from the monitoring station outward, devouring sensor grids in widening arcs. The chamber fell silent. Jason did not step forward. He watched the spreading distortion, jaw tight. We planned for instability.
Not this. No triumph, no reveal, only wait. Above them, the unidentified fleet altered course, direct trajectory toward the compressed corridor cluster. Every rerouted trade line, every stalled fleet, every political calculation, now sharing the same danger.
The anomaly expanded again. Confirmed gravitational manipulation. Corridor geometry no longer fluctuating. It was being bent. Concordat monitoring feeds collapsed one after another. ORX-22, ORX-24, ORX-31. Each blackout widened the compression zone. Civilian transponder signals spiked inside the distortion cluster. Freighter Calyx Dawn to Concordat control. Navigation grid collapsing, requesting vector correction. The transmission fractured into static. Another signal followed. Passenger liner, 32,000 aboard, drifting toward lensing shear. Vorek did not wait this time. He stepped forward onto the central disk. The Kresh fleet requires temporary corridor access clearance, he said, voice controlled but edged. Repositioning for containment, not assistance. Containment. Every word measured. High Arbiter Sereth's violet gaze narrowed. Any coordinated response falls under Concordat oversight. A temporary multi-species operational authority will be established for corridor defense. Voting nodes flickered in rapid succession. Emergency consensus forming. Jason spoke without moving from his position. We have stabilization nodes in the corridor perimeter. A beat. Designed for trade compression, not invasion-scale distortion. He tapped his wristband once. Above the projection, faint Terran markers activated along the corridor edge. Sensor buoys ignited in sequence. A lattice outline appeared. Fragile. Preliminary. Jason's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This will slow shear drift, not stop it. The stabilization grid pulsed outward, counteracting distortion vectors. Civilian vessel drift rates decreased slightly. Vorek watched the geometry. The Terran grid reshaped corridor space into defined arcs. His fleet remained just outside its boundary. If he integrated positioning vectors, Kresh ships could reinforce the corridor's outer curvature, or disrupt it entirely. Half a second. Too long for pride, he transmitted. Synchronize outer fleet alignment to Terran stabilization grid parameters. Partial integration only. Kresh formation icons shifted. Angular predator geometry aligning along Terran stabilization arcs. Uneasy. Precise. Not unified, but coordinated. Above them, the unidentified fleet adjusted trajectory again. Closing distance. The first defensive posture of the Concordat formed in shared space. Not allies, not enemies, just species forced into the same line of fire.
The Terran stabilization lattice pulsed harder. Gravitational variance spiked across the corridor perimeter. Power draw surged through the activated nodes. On the projection, several buoys flashed amber, then red. Jason's wrist display streamed cascading alerts. Node 7 exceeding tolerance. Node 9 feedback instability rising. Structural harmonic drift increasing. The external fleet adjusted, not drifting, responding. Structured energy emissions rippled outward in measured intervals, angled directly into the Terran lattice arcs. Vorek saw it immediately. They are mapping the grid, he said quietly, testing resistance points. The distortion pattern shifted, concentrating pressure against a single stabilization node, Node 12. Output spiked beyond capacity. Jason didn't move. It was built for trade compression, not sustained geometrical assault. A sharp surge. Node 12 flared white, then collapsed. The corridor edge warped violently. A civilian transport, Calyx Dawn, lurched toward the sheer boundary, hull integrity alarms flashing across the projection. Vector loss, power failing. Vorek stepped forward. Expand grid bandwidth. We reinforce outer arc. Jason's eyes remained on the collapsing geometry. We don't have the bandwidth. A beat. Not without losing coverage elsewhere. The external fleet altered vector again, precisely toward the weakened gap. Kresh engines ignited.
Vorak transmitted without hesitation. Full dorsal thrusters, locked Terran grid curvature, intercept shear wave. Kresh cruisers shifted into the destabilized arc, massive hulls absorbing part of the distortion surge. Simultaneously, Terran nodes rerouted residual energy through adjacent buoys. The civilian vessel's drift slowed, barely, then stabilized. Joint maneuver, uneasy, necessary. Power variance across the Terran lattice climbs to critical thresholds. Above the chamber, the unidentified fleet reconfigured. 12 contacts split cleanly into 2 formations. One maintained frontal pressure against the grid. The second veered outward, flanking. Not chaos, deliberate. The anomaly was no longer testing boundaries, it was studying them.
The distortion pattern stabilized. Too cleanly, the external fleet halted its forward compression and shifted into fixed geometric spacing. Then the signal began. Not noise. Structured, layered frequency bands spanning electromagnetic, gravimetric, and subspace carrier waves. Concordat translation arrays flared to life. Partial decryption streams populated across the chamber ceiling. Volari analysts fed raw pattern recognition into the grid. Thessian harmonic processors attempted resonance mapping. Fragments resolved. Input latency recorded. Energy lattice adaptation logged. Fleet distribution indexed. The chamber went still. High Arbiter Sareth's 4 arms lowered slowly. This transmission is not environmental fluctuation, the throat membrane resonated. It is deliberate broadcast. Data overlays aligned with previous corridor models. The anomaly's emergence vector matched precisely with the rerouted compression lines created after helix relocation. Not random convergence. Calculated positioning. Vorek's pupils contracted sharply. They waited for corridor geometry to shift, he said, low. They forced us into alignment. His tactical overlay replayed the last 30 minutes. Kresh fleet holding pattern. Partial pursuit spike. Grid synchronization. Every formation. Every vector. Logged. Jason watched the decoded fragments scroll. He didn't flinch, but his grip on the folded newspaper tightened slightly. We accelerated their observation window, he said, quietly. No apology, just acknowledgement. Across the projection, the external fleet began to withdraw, not retreating in panic, disengaging in order. Formation intact, distortion pressure easing, the corridor edge smoothed gradually. High Arbiter Sareth's voice carried through the chamber. Reclassification enacted. This event constitutes hostile adaptive incursion, intelligence-grade threat. The stabilization lattice dimmed to minimal output. The anomaly contracted, shrank, but did not vanish. At its former center, a faint beacon remained. Small, stable, broadcasting low-level telemetry into open space. The chamber stared at it in silence. They had not been attacked, they had been measured, and the galaxy was now on someone else's map. The beacon pulsed softly at the center of the corridor projection. Concordat intelligence arrays fed live telemetry into layered analysis grids. Frequency mapping confirmed continuous live-time corridor geometry scanning, not passive, adaptive. Fleet repositioning vectors appeared mirrored in the beacon's output stream. Every minor adjustment in Kresh formation, every Terran lattice fluctuation, tracked. Volari analysts projected escalation scenarios. Any high-energy surge increases beacon amplification by 42%. Thessian harmonic processors confirmed. It reflects tactical motion as signal gain. High Arbiter Sareth's gaze moved slowly across the chamber. Which faction possesses the most operational experience with corridor lattice manipulation? A pause. Violet eyes shifted toward Jason. Vorek stiffened slightly. The Empire requires no external oversight for fleet maneuvering, he said evenly. Silence held. Then, we request Terran modeling input, Vorek added, controlled. Procedural consultation.
not dependence, procedure. Jason did not step forward. He tapped his wrist interface once. A long-range predictive simulation unfolded above the chamber, replacing the static beacon projection with layered probability arcs. Stabilization grids were built expecting hostile geometry disruption, trade piracy, energy siphoning, regional sabotage. A beat, not reconnaissance-scale intelligence harvesting. Scenario paths ran in rapid succession. Crash full surge toward beacon. Beacon emission intensity spiked. Signal strength amplification 63%. Data capture exponential. Scenario, coordinated defensive posture with minimal vector change. Beacon signal attenuation 27%. Information gain reduced. The chamber absorbed it. Tactical restraint optimized survivability. Vorek's eyes flicked between models. No argument. Above them, projection focus tightened around the Terran simulation lattice. Concordat delegates began directing inquiries toward Jason. Can attenuation be increased? Can beacon drift if stationary? Estimate signal decay curve. Sareth remained silent, observing. Vorek noticed the shift. Authority had not been transferred, but operational gravity had moved, and it now orbited the human who never stepped to the center.
Jason exhaled once, quietly. Then he authorized access. A new projection replaced the corridor map. Terran Strategic Archive, restricted layer access granted. A subfile header materialized. Adaptive Geometry Defense Doctrine. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Layered schematics unfolded. Corridor lattices under stress simulations. Predictive modeling of hostile geometry distortion. Algorithm trees mapping adversarial observation cycles. Jason didn't step forward. He simply allowed the data to rotate. Trade grids were engineered with disruption modeling centuries ago, he said evenly. Piracy, sabotage, theoretical intelligence probes. A secondary classification appeared. Projection class. Observation-driven incursion. The beacon's behavior overlaid against archived Terran models. Waveform alignment. Vector correction response. Signal amplification following fleet motion. Match probability 91%. Vorek's gaze hardened, not in anger, but in recalculation. You have modeled this category before, he said. How long? Jason met his eyes. Since we realized someone eventually would. No embellishment. High Arbiter Sareth's voice resonated through the chamber. This doctrine reflects anticipatory defense philosophy. It does not constitute provocation. Several delegates nodded subtly. The projection advanced. Simulation branch. Civilian evacuation surge. Fleet reposition panic. Corridor traffic spike. Beacon amplification curve rose sharply. Data capture efficiency increased under chaotic vector shifts. A warning tag pulsed. Hostile systems benefit from reaction volatility. Jason's voice remained level. This isn't first contact. A beat. It's first probe. Silence. The beacon pulsed again, slightly stronger. Telemetry overlays compared live emission patterns against archived Terran models. Waveforms aligned almost perfectly. Not guesswork. Preparation. The anomaly hadn't been random, and Terran archives suggested something worse. They had expected to be measured long before they were discovered. Above the chamber, the beacon's frequency ticked upward again, not retreating, not advancing, listening, and now the galaxy knew. Humanity had been listening too. The Terran archive projection shifted again. A sublayer unfolded beneath the doctrine framework. Adaptive geometry defense. Full deployment requirements. Energy allocation matrices appeared. Corridor-wide predictive modeling. Continuous lattice harmonics recalibration. High-bandwidth telemetry interception. A secondary feed opened from human stellar command. Outer colony grid status. Strain increasing. Reserve fusion banks diverting 18% additional output. Non-essential industrial sectors entering phased slowdown. A remote station hologram flickered into view. Terran outpost Kestrel 9. Energy rationing protocols activated. Atmospheric shield output reduced to efficiency mode. Agricultural light cycles compressed by 12%. No panic, just adjustment. Vorik watched the numbers in silence. "This is not symbolic strain," he said quietly. "No," Jason replied. The projection advanced. Scenario modeling. Expand corridor grid to suppress beacon further. Domestic defense coverage drops by 14%. Outer system response latency increases. Retract corridor stabilization. Beacon amplification increases. Compression shear destabilizes trade lanes. A balanced curve hovered between extremes. High Arbiter Sareth spoke. "Shared defense cannot rely on unilateral depletion. The Concordat will not permit systemic imbalance through singular sacrifice." Jason studied the model, then made the decision. "Maintain partial extension," he said. "Sustain predictive lattice at 60%. The projection recalculated. Beacon signal attenuation stabilized modestly. Terran domestic strain eased slightly. Not optimal. Sustainable." Vorik's gaze fixed on him. "You weaken your perimeter to stabilize ours." Jason shook his head slightly. "We rebalance. That's different." Above the chamber, the beacon pulse frequency adjusted. Not surging, not retreating. Testing the reduced resistance envelope. In the corner of the projection, Kestrel 9's hologram flickered again. Brief, subtle. Jason noticed. Said nothing. The grid held, but now the cost was visible. Preparation wasn't free. It was measured in watts, in slowed factories, in dimmed colony lights, and the beacon was still listening. The beacon adapted again. At 60% Terran lattice output, attenuation began to erode. Pulse amplitude climbed in steady increments. Signal gain returning. Corridor compression deepened along the outer arc. Civilian freighters inside the envelope reported renewed drift instability. Volari projections flashed amber. Thessian harmonic variance rose sharply. The debate ignited across the chamber. Resource models spun. Who diverts power? Who absorbs slowdown? Who risks domestic strain? High Arbiter Sareth extended two arms sharply. Corridor defense now requires multi-species contribution. Structural burden will not remain unilateral. Silence settled. All eyes shifted, briefly, to Admiral Vorik. The Kresh fleet held position along the Terran curvature arc. Engines stable, reactors primed. A tactical overlay flashed inside Vorik's retinal field. Reactor diversion reduces shield integrity by 9%. Weapon cycling latency increase minimal. Operational vulnerability window moderate. He did not hesitate. "Divert reactor surplus to corridor geometry," Vorik ordered. "Public channel. Measured. For containment integrity." A Kresh officer responded instantly. "Admiral, shield strength will..." "Then we hold with 9% less." Kresh cruisers shifted formation. Reactor signatures surged as controlled energy streams projected into the weakened arc. The Terran lattice recalibrated immediately, synchronizing to the new harmonic input. For the first time, Terran nodes and Kresh mass stabilizers aligned into a unified waveform. Jason did not request assistance. He said only, "Match harmonic phase at 0.73 variance." Terran nodes adjusted. Kresh output compensated. The corridor edge smoothed more effectively than before. Stability curves tightened across the projection. Beacon pulse amplitude fluctuated, then dipped. Signal distortion pattern changed. Data capture efficiency declining under unified geometry, not eliminated, reduced. The anomaly responded, not retreating, but recalibrating. The chamber watched in silence. No applause, no speeches. Two former adversaries holding the same structural line, and for the first time, the beacon was learning less than it expected. The unified waveform held. Terran lattice arcs and Kresh reactor streams remained phase-locked, corridor compression stabilizing within acceptable tolerance.
for 12 seconds. Then the beacon shifted. Pulse amplitude steadied, but frequency narrowed. It migrated upward across the spectrum, sliding into encrypted concordat transmission bands. A faint flicker ran through the Terran control overlay. Node latency spike detected. Synchronization jitter, 0.04 seconds. Small, but unnatural. Across the chamber, one Kresh cruiser's reactor feed wavered briefly before restabilizing. Vorek's eyes sharpened. That variance was not internal. Concordat voting systems glitched. For a fraction of a second, vote tallies inverted, then corrected. High Arbiter Sareth's throat membrane tightened. Signal contamination detected. Thessian harmonic arrays brightened, crystalline facets refracting rapid spectral analysis. It is mimicking waveform signatures, Luma reported. Adaptive echo behavior. The Drex drone rotated slowly. Pattern recursion observed. It reflects coordination logic with incremental deviation. On the projection, the beacon's emission lines intertwined with the unified Terran Kresh lattice, model, overlaying, mirroring, adjusting. Jason's gaze hardened slightly. He didn't step forward. "It's not mapping the corridor," he said quietly. "A beat. It's mapping coordination." Vorek understood immediately. Not ships, not positions. Decision flow, reaction timing, harmonic alignment adjustments. The beacon wasn't just observing defense, it was studying how species synchronized under pressure. The pulse stabilized at its new frequency, lower amplitude, higher penetration. A tiny indicator flashed at the edge of the Terran overlay. Unauthorized handshake attempt, blocked. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. Physically, the corridor remained stable. The grid held, but now the threat had moved inward, from geometry to information, and the next layer of vulnerability was no longer space, it was trust.
The unified lattice nodes and Kresh reactor streams adjusted in synchronized intervals, precise, measured. Then it happened. A micro delay, 0.12 seconds. Barely visible. Kresh cruiser Vath core shifted phase alignment a fraction late. A Terran stabilization node detected the lag and overcompensated by 0.09 seconds. Corridor shear rose 2% along the outer arc before correction stabilized it again. No alarms, no collapse, but measurable. Thessian harmonic arrays flared bright cyan. Recursive timing loop detected, Luma reported. Echo pattern preceding adjustment by fractional interval. The Drex drone's optics narrowed. Predictive injection confirmed. Signal precedes response vector. On the projection, the beacon's emission graph showed a faint pre-wave, arriving milliseconds before Terran Kresh synchronization commands executed. Not mirroring, preceding. Vorek's posture stiffened. They are not reacting to our grid. Jason's gaze locked onto the waveform overlay. He saw the interval gap before anyone else did. "It's no longer observing," he said quietly. A beat. "It's anticipating." Silence. The implications spread through the chamber. The beacon had captured enough coordination timing to model reaction cycles. Not geometry, decision cadence. Unified grid still held physically, but every adjustment now risked being forecast before execution. Vorek understood immediately. Our synchronization window has become exposure. The beacon pulse remained steady, calm, patient. Corridor stability metrics hovered within safe range, but the next predicted adjustment point glowed faintly on the overlay before Terran systems issued it. The exploit window was narrow, but real. The threat was now operating one fraction ahead of their reaction cycle, not overpowering them, outpacing them. And in strategic terms, that was worse. The projection displayed the predictive gap in stark clarity. Each Terran-Kresh synchronization cycle now cast a faint shadow ahead of it, an anticipatory echo from the beacon. Jason studied the timing grid for half a breath. Then he acted. "Authorize nonlinear phase variance protocol," he said. Terran lattice nodes shifted immediately. Regular harmonic cadence fractured into irregular micro-adjustments. Fractional timing offsets injected into each stabilization pulse. No visible surge, just unpredictability. Corridor shear rose briefly to 6.8% as the system recalibrated, within tolerance. Thessian harmonic arrays brightened erratically. "Tracking solution destabilized," Luma reported. "Variance no longer periodic." The Drex drone rotated sharply. Volatility increase registered. Predictive model degradation likely. Kresh cruisers continued projecting stable reactor rhythm for half a second too long. Vorik saw the divergence. If he maintained Imperial cadence, the unified waveform would split, becoming predictable again. If he followed Terran irregularity, he would abandon disciplined formation symmetry. He had less than a second. Vorik transmitted. "Match Terran phase deviations. Mirror variance." Kresh reactor outputs destabilized, intentionally. Angular fleet geometry loosened into fluid alignment, matching Terran nonlinear cadence. Jason spoke only once. "Break the rhythm." Beacon pre-wave emissions spiked, arriving at the previous interval, but the Terran-Kresh adjustment no longer followed it. The pre-wave overshot, misaligned by 0.21 seconds. On the projection, the anticipatory echo landed in empty phase space. Corridor shear dipped. Stability climbed back toward baseline. For the first time, the beacon pulse flickered. Not collapsing, not retreating, but recalculating. Its predictive advantage disrupted. Unified grid holding, not through strength, but through unpredictability. No celebration, just a new variable introduced into the equation. And for the first time since contact, the beacon had guessed wrong. The beacon stopped fluctuating. Unified grid variance normalized under irregular cadence. Predictive pre-wave ceased. For 3 full seconds, silence. Corridor distortion flattened to near zero. Stabilization lattice hovered in steady equilibrium. Then, the beacon's signal compressed. All wide-spectrum emissions collapsed inward into a single, focused gravitational spike. Projection markers converged at the anomaly center. Space itself began to condense. Not violently, deliberately. Gravitational density climbed in tight geometric symmetry. Matter readings fluctuated between detectable and undefined. Concordat classification systems failed to tag composition. Non-natural assembly pattern detected, Thessian Representative Luma reported. Harmonic arrays pulsing sharp white. Non-natural assembly pattern detected. The Drex drone rotated slowly. Self-assembling structure confirmed. A faint outline emerged within the compression point. Dark, angular, compact. Not fleet scale, not vessel scale. Something smaller. Dense geometry unfolded in layered segments, as if space were folding into structure rather than structure occupying space. Vorik's pupils narrowed. This is controlled manifestation. Jason watched the condensation stabilize into defined edges. He understood before the classification algorithms caught up. "It's not probing anymore," he said quietly. A beat. "It's placing." The gravitational spike diminished as the formation completed. Corridor shear remained stable. Unified Terran-Kresh waveform held steady, untouched. The new object rotated slowly at the corridor center. Black, geometric, surface absorbing sensor pulses instead of reflecting them. Beacon pulse gone, replaced by physical presence. No energy signature, no weapons signature, just arrival. The anomaly no longer listened. It existed. The object remained motionless at corridor center. No propulsion spike. No weapons signature. No energy accumulation consistent with attack posture. Unified grid maintained irregular phase cadence, watching for response.
Then the structure emitted again, not wide spectrum, narrow band, precise. The emission frequency aligned almost perfectly with the Terran-Kresh harmonic waveform currently stabilizing the corridor. Thessian harmonic arrays brightened. Pattern symmetry detected. Emission mirrors unified phase variance within tolerable deviation. The Drex drone's optics narrowed. Mathematical recursion identified. Signal contains iterative logic branches. Volari Ambassador Ryzen lifted both upper arms slowly. Probability of structured communication increasing. The emission did not target civilian vessels, did not probe fleet positioning. It locked on to the harmonic alignment arc between Terran nodes and Kresh reactor streams. Jason's gaze hardened slightly. He saw the implication before the translation matrices finished mapping the waveform. It responded to alignment, he said quietly. Vorex straightened, not in aggression, in recalibration. This is not containment posture, he said evenly. This is directed engagement. The object's surface geometry shifted subtly, panels folding inward along non-Euclidean seams. A projection extended outward from its core, not energy surge, not distortion. A three-dimensional lattice representation unfolded into corridor space. It resembled the outer trade corridor, but altered. Compression arcs redrawn, vector pathways shifted, additional nodes, unrecognized, embedded beyond Concordat space. The projection rotated slowly, overlaying against the existing corridor map. Comparison matrices flickered, deviation patterns highlighted. The object was not destabilizing geometry, it was presenting one. Unified grid held steady. No attack followed, just the projection, silent, deliberate, not invasion, not retreat, intent. And for the first time, the anomaly was no longer testing, it was communicating.
The projected lattice rotated slowly above the chamber. Concordat overlays aligned current corridor geometry against the anomaly's model. Deviation markers appeared immediately. The additional nodes embedded within the projection aligned precisely along previously mapped gravitational stress corridors, regions long considered unstable but unavoidable. Thessian harmonic arrays intensified to deep violet. Resonance compatibility confirmed, Luma reported. Proposed lattice distributes harmonic strain across wider nodal spectrum. The Drex drone processed structural data. Efficiency increase projected at 17%. Shear variance reduced by half under equivalent traffic load. Volari trade algorithms recalculated compression curves. Optimization detected. Freight throughput improves without increased distortion. Silence returned to the chamber. The anomaly's model did not constrict. It expanded stability. The Concordat's corridor, long defended, long optimized, registered as structurally inefficient beside the projection. Jason studied the overlay comparison. Terran stabilization arcs now appeared reactive, temporary, fragmented. He understood the inversion instantly. We weren't stabilizing it, he said quietly. Vorex's eyes remained fixed on the larger lattice. We were resisting its natural architecture. The projection zoomed outward. Beyond known Concordat space, additional nodes formed a network, interlinked through gravitational harmonics extending far past mapped borders. Not invasion routes, structural pathways. The corridor was not an isolated trade artery. It was a segment of something larger, a network architecture spanning distances the Concordat had never charted. High Arbiter Sereth lowered all four arms slowly. This model reframes corridor geometry as partial system component. The dark object remained motionless at center. No threat posture, no advance, just the lattice projection rotating above it. Calm, precise. The Concordat had defended its corridor as sovereign infrastructure. The anomaly suggested it was infrastructure already, and the galaxy was only occupying one unfinished segment. The expanded lattice slowed.
Then one node intensified, directly at the Concordat corridor center. The dark structure adjusted its orientation, precise, deliberate, aligning with the unified Terran-Kresh harmonic arc. A new marker appeared within the projection. Alignment required. No timer, no escalation metric, no threat indicator, just designation. The object emitted a narrow synchronization pulse. The unified waveform responded. Subtle harmonic echo returning from the Terran-Kresh grid. Thasian harmonic arrays flared. Resonance compatibility confirmed, Luma reported. Integration threshold within acceptable tolerance. The Drex drone processed projection trees. Structural stability increase statistically significant under extended lattice inclusion. Volari trade algorithms recalculated. Projected throughput expansion exceeds 20%. Shear variance reduction across outer sectors. The pulse did not repeat. It held steady at the shared frequency. Jason watched the brightened node. "It's not offering assistance," he said quietly. A beat. "It's offering inclusion." Vorak did not react emotionally. He studied the outer network arcs stretching beyond mapped Concordat space. "If we align," he said evenly, "we accept architecture we did not design." High Arbiter Sareth lowered 2 arms. "The refusal preserves authorship," the throat membrane resonated. "Acceptance redefines jurisdiction." The projection expanded again. The corridor node pulsed brighter, now clearly a junction point, not a boundary. Beyond it, the greater lattice illuminated in faint branching pathways extending into uncharted dark. No coercion, no escalation, no pressure. The structure remained motionless at center, waiting. For the first time since war had been declared, the decision was not about defense. It was about scale.
The chamber did not rush the decision. The alignment node pulsed, steady, patient, waiting. High Arbiter Sareth's voice carried across the sphere. "Primary corridor stakeholders must authorize structural synchronization." Silence. Admiral Vorak stepped forward first. "The Kresh Empire does not yield sovereignty." A pause. "But we recognize structural advantage." He did not look at Jason. "We will not obstruct exploratory alignment, not submission, recognition." All eyes shifted. Jason did not approach the central disk. He stayed where he had always stood, hands behind his back, newspaper under his arm. Alignment proceeds under Terran nonlinear phase doctrine. The projection responded instantly. Terran nonlinear phase doctrine applied. Conditional integration framework engaged. Observation window active. The node brightened, then narrowed. A precise harmonic bridge extended, controlled, measured. Data flowed. Command channels remained sealed. The larger network beyond Concordat space illuminated faintly. More nodes, more corridors, distances never charted. The dark object rotated once. Slow, deliberate, not retreating, not claiming, assessing. Jason watched the expanding lattice. "This isn't first contact," he said quietly. "It's compatibility." High Arbiter Sareth spoke again. "Concordat infrastructure status expanded. Sovereignty retained." Vorak studied the projection. For the first time since war was declared, he inclined his head slightly toward Jason. Acknowledgement. Jason unfolded the newspaper. "War would have been easier." A beat. "But evolution never is." The projection zoomed outward one final time. The new lattice glowed against the void. Far beyond mapped space, 3 distant nodes flickered to life, unconnected, watching. The object at corridor center remained still. Integration partial, observation mutual. The galaxy had not been conquered. It had been repositioned. Fade to black. Replay line. "We didn't win a war. We rewrote the map."